Hello everyone, welcome to Quantitative Methods in Social Science. Now, I am a political scientist by training, so I'm going to be teaching this course from a political science perspective. But you can apply whatever we are doing here to social science more broadly. And basically, we are learning statistics, so you can apply the knowledge to um, statistics broadly. If you have some data, you can analyze that data with any tool that this course offers you. So I'm very excited and thank you very much for joining me. And if you haven't yet subscribed to Social Data Analysis, please do. And I hope that you enjoyed. So in our first lesson, we're going to talk about the very basics, the very foundation, which is the study of social science or the study of political science. What exactly are we trying to achieve here? Now, we want to know how we know what we know, all right? So we have some knowledge about the world, and every day we also try to gather more knowledge of the world, but we want to make sure that we are using the scientific approach to getting knowledge, right? We want to use the scientific approach to knowledge accumulation and not just, believing everything we see out there or anything that comes to mind, right? So that is basically what we want to do when we are doing research in political science or social science. Now there are um, two approaches to attaining this, and I might even say there are three, right? And then the first you might already know is qualitative methods. Okay, qualitative methods. Now, this course is not a qualitative methods course, so that is not what we are going to be doing here. But the second, which we will be doing, is quantitative methods, right? This course is a quantitative methods course, and that is what this set of YouTube videos is for. Now, a blend of these two is mixed methods, right? Mixed methods, which some scholars, including myself, also do as well. Mixed methods. Mixed method is basically using some tools in qualitative methods alongside tools in quantitative methods for research. Okay, so this course is about quantitative methods. We understand that. But now, whether qualitative or quantitative methods, what we are basically interested in is how do we understand the world? Okay, how do we explain phenomena? How do we explain rising sea levels, for example? How do we explain the different levels of income? Or how do we explain why some elections turn violent? To explain that, the first thing that we want to do, right, as social scientists, the first thing that we want to do as social scientists is that we want to have some theory of how the world works, right? We want to have some theory. So a theory is basically a conjecture, right? A conjecture or model of how the world works. Okay, of how the world works. Okay, so that is basically what a theory is. Now, when we have some theory of how the world works, we want to move from there into some statements that we can actually test to know whether our theory is true or false. And that leads us into what you might have heard before called hypothesis. Okay, hypothesis. So hypothesis is basically a statement that is falsifiable for which we can know whether your theory is true or not. All right. So if your theory is true, what should we expect, right? So that's what hypothesis is basically. If your theory is true, what should what should we expect, right? So if the hypothesis should be falsifiable, it shouldn't be something that we cannot falsify. It has to be falsifiable. So then when we have a hypothesis, then we want to move on to the next thing, which is empirical testing. Okay, empirical testing. we want to test our theory and hypothesis to be sure that to some extent there is some evidence to believe that the phenomena that we are interested in is caused by that explanation that our theory suggests. Okay, so that's what empirical testing is about. And usually there are qualitative methods to do that, there are quantitative methods, or there are mixed methods, approaches to do that. And this course is going to be about the quantitative methods, the statistical approach to empirical testing. But when we move on from empirical testing, the next thing is how we want to use this empirical test to evaluate our theory and hypothesis. Okay, so we want to evaluate theory and hypothesis. Okay, so then what is our result from the empirical test, and how does it actually compare? How does it actually speak to our theory and hypothesis? And from there, the last stage is hooray! We have scientific knowledge. We have been able to gain some knowledge of the world, whether our hypothesis was found to be like had support or did not have support. We have learned something about the world, and we have arrived at scientific knowledge. So we started from having some theory that explains how the world works into formulating hypotheses, some statement that we can actually test to be true or false depending on how the world works in our theory. Then we test it. We test our theory. Then we compare the results against our hypothesis to be sure whether indeed we are actually we actually have support for our theory, and then we have some scientific knowledge. Now, how do we actually go about this process, right? If we have this phenomenon of interest and then we want to explain it, the easiest way, and then actually how we do it in science, is that we formulate our phenomena in terms of what we would call variables. Okay, variables. So a variable is anything that varies, right? Variable, it's basically anything that varies. And what we want to actually do is that we want to think of the world, or we want to think about the world in terms of these variables. So, for example, if I'm interested in levels of income, right? I'm interested in, let's say, levels of income in the US, right? Levels of income in the US. I could think of levels of income in the US as, let's say, a variable called Y, okay? And let's say I'm interested in education, right? Educational levels as well. Educational levels. Well, I can think of educational levels as a variable called Z. So basically, whatever that we are interested in studying, we can formulate it in terms of variables and then discuss it or speak to it in that way. Now, how does this actually work? Okay, let's start doing some research here. Let's say, for example, let's say I am interested in why do some people in the US earn more than others? Okay, so this is my research question, right? I can call it a research question. Now, this obviously means that I'm interested in income levels. Okay, income levels. So I can think of these income levels in the US as a variable. Okay, so when I call the variable income levels, I'm basically talking about the actual differences in dollar amounts in the US. Let's say, for example, we have some income, if we have some data on income in the US, right? With some people earn $100, some people earn 40, some people earn 130, and others earn $90. Now, this is data that I have collected into my variable called income levels. Now, remember we said right here that we always want to start with a theory. Okay, so then my theory is that the more degrees you have, right, the more degrees or like educational levels you attain, okay, the more degrees you have, the more money your boss pays you. Okay, the more money your boss pays you. Okay, now because of this, I have introduced a new variable called educational level, right? Because I said that the more degrees you have, okay, so then I am basically saying that educational levels matter for income. Educational levels. If that is my claim, that education levels matter for income, then we can formulate the relationship between educational levels and income levels as such, where we have educational levels here has something to do with income levels, right? So we are basically saying that the more education you get, the more income you get. Now, this is our theory. And then we have been able to formulate the variables in our theory. We've been able to formulate the phenomena in our theory as variables. Now, what type of variables are these? This brings us to the basic types of variables that we have. And these are not the only two variables that we have. Later on in the course, we'll be talking about other variables like moderating variables, mediating variables. But for now, we are interested in two types of variables. The first variable we are interested in is called independent variable. Independent variable. Others would also call this explanatory variable. Explanatory. You may also want to call it factor. Either works, right? You can call it either of these. Now, your independent variable is basically the variable that explains okay, your independent variable is the variable that explains changes in your phenomena of interest. Okay, the variable that explains changes in your phenomena of interest. Oops. Okay, great. That explains changes in your phenomena of interest. So in this case, we are interested in income levels, and what is actually being used to explain income levels is education. So now education is our independent variable in this theory. So in this theory, education is the independent variable, right? Education level is the independent variable. Others will denote it as IV. So I think that it's much simpler. We're going to use IV moving forward. And the second variable that you should know is the dependent variable. Dependent. It depends on another variable, right? So the dependent variable is the outcome of interest, okay? The phenomena, the variable that represents the phenomena we want to explain. The variable that represents the phenomena we want to explain, okay? So in this case, our dependent variable is income levels, okay? So we can say that income levels is our DV. Now others call dependent variable outcome variable. It means the same thing. So now we remember we have some data, okay, about income levels, and we know that, let's say, let's collect some data on education, right? Now we have, let's say, high school diploma, there's a bachelor's degree, that you can get. You can get a master's degree, and then you can get a PhD, right? And then we have this data, we've gone into the world, we've collected this data of how these different educational levels affect income. Let me show you how exactly we're going to be sort of seeking after this relationship as we move along, right? We can map this relationship in, let's say, on a plot, okay? On a plot where we have our x here. Our x here is education levels, okay? We have education levels. So high school is H, bachelor's degree is a B, master's degree is an M, PhD is a P. In our data, we have income levels as well, which is 40, 30, 40, 90, 100, 130. So there's 40, there's 90, there's 100, there's 130. Now, assuming that our theory is true, if our theory is true that educational levels actually affects income, then what we should see is that if someone has a high school degree, the person is probably typically paid $40 per day. If someone has a bachelor's degree, on average, the person might be paid, let's say, $90 per day. If someone has a master's degree, let's say on average, the person is paid about $100 per day. If the person has a PhD, on average, we can hypothesize that the person is paid $130 per day. Now we can draw a line between these points. What we have here is a positive slope. Basically, we can easily see that as educational levels increase, income levels increase as well. So these are the sort of evidence that we might be looking to see if indeed our theory about education and income is true. Now, this is not all that you need as scientific evidence. It can be part of your scientific evidence, but there's more to that. And that is what we're going to cover in the lessons that follow. In our next lesson, we're going to talk about building theories in political or social sciences, and then some of the terms that would play throughout the course as we move along. So don't miss the next lesson. See you in lesson 2 on quantitative methods for social science.